Hi, thanks for joining us for our next Women in Nuclear. We have got the wonderful Jaz Diab with us again, and we've changed a little bit of direction on this one. So previously we've been featuring some of the women around the world. We've had Grace Stanke, Miss America, Jaz previously, Kirsty Braben, Helen Cook, international nuclear lawyer. And we're very fortunate today that Peter Dutton and David Littleproud, the leaders of the coalition, have agreed to sit down with us and have a chat. We feel like we've heard from the scientists, we've heard from experts, and now we're really excited to sort of hear from the politicians that hopefully in the future will be leading this conversation and leading the discussion around nuclear and changing the legislation so that we can move forward into this new nuclear landscape. So I'd like to welcome Jaz Diab today. So many of you know Jaz from a previous session, but I'll just get Jaz to introduce yourself and all of the amazing things that you do, too many for me to remember and to mention.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, so Jaz Diab, I wear lots of different hats. I am a former military officer, spent 22 years in the Army, but recently left, and I now am the General Manager of Global Nuclear Security Partners, a nuclear security consulting company that works around the globe. I'm also the President of Women in Nuclear Australia, which is a not-for-profit and apolitical organisation that is about encouraging girls and women into nuclear careers and working with nuclear industries to make sure their workplace is inclusive for these girls and women. And so with those hats on today, I'm hoping we can have a really great conversation about what nuclear in Australia could look like.
And you're also doing some amazing work with Mothers for Nuclear. So it's an initiative that was started in the US around Diablo Canyon by some incredible women, and a very important cohort of women that want to be involved because nuclear can bring jobs, it can help our kids stay in the region and stay connected to science, which is huge. We love, especially women, we love women in STEM. So the idea that we could be encouraging a whole new cohort of people to get involved in science and very excited about this new technology is fabulous. So tell me about the Mothers for Nuclear.
Yeah, so Heather Hoff and her offsite at Diablo Canyon started this to keep Diablo Canyon open in California. They knew that if that power plant closed down, they would have not enough power and energy for their community. Plus, they really enjoyed working in the nuclear power plant. So they fought really hard, and Diablo Canyon has remained open and will. It's getting an extension of life there. But it is about creating power and energy generationally, not just short term, being able to build communities, because nuclear power does invest in communities. Most of the costs for a nuclear power plant pay salaries. It doesn't go into fuel, it doesn't go into other things around the site, it goes into people. And so that's why Mothers for Nuclear, which is now global, are groups of mums that really want to promote why they support nuclear power and energy as a green solution.
That's amazing. It's such an incredible phenomenon that women could be coming together and trying to save nuclear, which is, you know, the whole thing is there. Like, nuclear is terrifying. We've got The Simpsons, we've got everything. And then to be able to say, we're mums, we care, we want our kids, longevity, our grandkids. For this cohort of women to be so supportive, it says so much about what nuclear actually is.
Yeah, we've got to demystify a lot of the information that's in pop culture, because that's where we get a lot of our information on nuclear in Australia, unfortunately.
Yeah, we're not from The Simpsons. So so thank you so much. We're so grateful for having you, and we're going to interview the wonderful Peter Dutton, Leader of the Opposition, and David Littleproud, Leader of the Nationals, coming up right after this. Thank you so much.
Hi Peter and David, I'm really excited to get to chat to you a little bit about nuclear. So I guess my first question is, when looking at the Australian energy mix, why did you contemplate nuclear?
Well, Jaz, I think there's a compelling argument, and not just for our country but for many countries around the world. I think people would be surprised to know that something like 400 reactors around the world, it's a zero emissions technology. We'd signed up to the AUKUS deal of the nuclear propulsion system for our submarines, and it makes perfect sense for our economy because we want to bring prices down, and we want to make sure that we've got reliability so that manufacturing can continue to grow. And that's, I think, a really important part of the debate about nuclear as well.
Yeah, I think it was a sensible transition that we're always going to take. I mean, if we're going to live up to our international commitments, we also had to protect the jobs in regional Australia in providing baseload power. And much of the expertise that exists in coal-fired power stations can transition right across into a nuclear power plant. That's common sense, and I think we should back ourselves like the rest of the world has. We can do this better than anyone else. And we've got to change the culture in this country of finding reasons why not to do things, just getting on and doing the job.
Yeah, you bring up a really great point around workforce, which is something near and dear to my heart. So talking about regional communities where there are already coal workers, how do we encourage more girls and women into careers into that energy industry if we progress down a nuclear path?
Well, I think we set the signals in the market by us having the courage to come forward and say, we're going to build these things. You're going to own them, but we're going to do this. We set the investment signals, but also the signals around the skills that we're going to need. And I think you're already seeing that because we had the courage with AUKUS, and that's already seen universities start to shift some of their courses. And it's just a comfortable transition from what we're doing with AUKUS into a civil industry. And I think that sends the market signals that are now changing it and changing it very quickly. I think the investment in STEM right through into university and through has opened up significant opportunities that provide that opportunities for jobs in regional Australia where those existing coal-fired power stations will be replaced.
And Jaz, the only thing I'd add to that too is if we look at the international experience, again, where industry is well established, there are an enormous number of women who are involved in the STEM elements of research, of delivery, of the operation of plants, et cetera, and they're high-paying jobs as well. So they're high-paying jobs in regional areas. They can underpin a whole ecosystem of activity, whether it's a data centre, whether it's a high-energy user, a smelter, whatever it might be, and women are involved in those projects as well. And again, I think the international experience is instructive here, and we can benefit, and women here in Australia can benefit enormously from the investment that we can make into nuclear.
I'm going to shift tact and talk a little bit about cost. And I'm not going to be one of those mean journalists that goes, tell me the costings right now. But rather, when I try to explain the energy mix in Australia to people, they often fall back on things like AEMO's ISP or the Gen Cost report, which only really tell us a small portion of Australia's energy story. When we do talk about nuclear, its benefits are far longer and need to be looked at holistically. How do you think you can describe nuclear's value? Because it is more than just a 5-year solution. It's a generational asset, right?
Well, the Denny Price frontier work I think is really important to have a look at, but other international bodies of work that have been done to look at the viability and to have a look at what's happening prospectively or right now in some of those markets. I think people are, when they look at the frontier work here, they see a very important message, and that is that there is a huge cost with what the government's proposing at the moment. So what the government says will be a $120 billion investment into renewables. Denny Price, who I think is probably the most accomplished and the most credible economic commentator in the energy space in our country, he says that that's something like another $500 or $550 billion more than that. So it's the cost is relative is the first point. And again, if we look at the proposal that the coalition's got on the table, the Nationals and Liberals have worked up, we're not talking about starting to reinvent the wheel here. We're looking at small modular reactors. We're looking at the technology that exists in other countries. We're not talking about a bespoke Australia-made proposal. This is utilising existing technology. It's not the first of type, and therefore we reduce the risks around cost and around time. Final point, which I think is a really important one as well, is that the amortisation period of a nuclear site, something around 60, 70, 80 years. And I think the technology is all trending for that time to be extended. For an offshore wind turbine, probably about 19 years. So you've got 4 lifespans to pay for when you look at the energy comparisons that need to be made between the different technologies. And that, I think, is having an honest debate about the relative cost between the different technologies, because ultimately we must have a baseload 24/7 power to firm up the renewables in the system.
And it's also a cost to agriculture. I mean, this all renewables approach is just going to litter regional Australia with transmission lines, panels and turbines. That's going to tear up your food security, push up your food prices, when there is a sensible way to achieve reduction in emissions. Utilising existing transmission lines where existing coal-fired power stations are, that's just common sense. And the amortisation of it, and what I fear is at the end of some of these renewable projects on regional land, if the proponent or the owner of the land then decides that's the end of it, we're going to have 28,000 kilometres of transmission lines effectively going nowhere to nothing.
Yeah.
So we've got to think through this. Why would we spend on something that we're going to have to plug in, and then at the end of the life in 15 years' time or 20 years' time, they turn around and Landhover says, I'm out. Effectively, we built all these transmission lines to nothing. So this is where we should pause and get this right, get the planning right, and that's what we've done. And there's an upfront cost, but the long-term payback is not just in jobs; it's reliable power and food security for generations to come.
And I guess part of that is, like, a lot of women see themselves as environmentalists, conservationists, and that's often an argument that gets thrown in the face of nuclear, that it's not environmentally friendly, that it's all these bits about green gooey waste and stuff. What have you seen about the environmental impact of renewables in those communities, and what do you think nuclear will be able to do to benefit?
Well, it's not just environmental, it's the human toll as well. I've been to public meetings and sat with an 85-year-old man who has two sons that refuse to talk to each other now. One because they've got the turbines, the other's got the transmission lines. And his only wish is that he hopes that before he dies, they can reconcile. It's torn communities apart, it's torn families apart. It has been reckless in the way that they have rolled it out without any consultation or understanding of the human toll. But then if you want to look at the environmental toll, you are actually destroying the very thing you're purporting to represent to protect. And that's the natural environment. We're seeing natural habitat destroyed. In fact, some of the EISs that have been provided require their workers to have clubs in the back of their car so that when they fell trees, if there's koalas that need to be euthanized, that they're able to be euthanized. That's not a good environmental outcome. And you wonder where, the WWF and the Greens are on this when we're destroying the very thing we're protecting. If you get back to first principles is to reduce emissions. What's wrong with doing that with nuclear energy, transitioning some of those coal-fired power stations? I would have thought first principles says that's common sense.
And so I guess the next big challenge would be, if you are successful at the next election, how do you make nuclear bipartisan? Because it has only succeeded in the US and the UK where they've had bipartisan support to nuclear.
Well, Jaz, there's no doubt in my mind that the Labor Party will end up supporting nuclear. I just think the science, the financial reality, what we're seeing in the system in terms of unreliability now, the lack of prospective investment that's available to be made into green hydrogen, etc. I think all of that adds up to a bipartisan position being achieved. Now, I don't think that's going to happen under Anthony Albanese's leadership, but I think it will under the next leader of the Labor Party. I think, for example, Peter Malinauskas is very open to nuclear. He's the Premier of South Australia and he's more progressive and gets the understanding that a lot of us already have, and that is that in a zero emissions technology, that's the only way that we're going to achieve our net zero by 2050 commitments. If we don't have nuclear, we're not going to be able to meet the reduction in the emissions that we've committed to. And again, this is why 2 out of 3 young Australians are supporting nuclear, because they've read widely, they understand what's happening in Europe, and they get it. I think it's also important to note that the legislation to facilitate Australia's investment into the nuclear submarines has gone through the Parliament in a matter of months. And it's done that on a bipartisan basis. And the Labor Party were good enough, and I think made a very sensible decision to support us when we were in government, when we negotiated with the US and the UK to land the AUKUS agreement on the nuclear submarines. And I think this is what has to happen now, and we would be very supportive of the government in a bipartisan way. So when the government says that, well, we're worried about time, we may not get something until mid-2030s, early 2040s. All of that timeline can be condensed from a bipartisan position, and that's what we need to continue to work toward.
Yeah, well, I think we've run out of time, but thank you so much. I think that there's so many opportunities for us to continue talking about nuclear because it is something a lot of Aussies just aren't across. And I'm pretty passionate about sharing that with them. So thank you both.
Great to catch up. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.